Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Sri Chaitanya Mahavishtam Stapitam Jena Vittala Isana Vipakadamayam Adati Sarparadita Nam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pustaya Talesi Mati Bhaktivedanta Samaritanam Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pucharane Sesha Snehavari Puspati Desa Vansaprabhyascha Kripasindhuvescha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo. I'd like to begin speaking about life balancing by speaking about why don't we get rid of the screen for a few minutes. I think the easiest way to do it is just cover the projector part. Just put a piece of paper over it or something. Yeah. Is by speaking about some Shastra, the Avanti Brahmana, because the Avanti Brahmana, interesting enough, the way that he had to balance his life, because he was so much on this side, he went to such an extreme on the other side that's quite staggering, quite amazing. But we'll hear of his pastime or the story. Now, who knows who spoke this 23rd chapter of the 11th canto? Does anyone know who spoke this? It's called the Song of the Avanti Brahmana. Avanti. Does anyone know where Avantipuras? Yeah, Ujjain, right now, in Madhya Pradesh. And Avanti is also famous for what? Most famous for what? Gurukula. And guess who went to Gurukula? There, Krishna and Balaram. And who else? Sudama. So, who spoke this song of the Avanti Brahmana? Krishna himself is going to tell this pastime in the Uddhava Gita. He's speaking to Uddhava. Now there's a section of the Bhagavatam in the 22nd chapter that leads up to this, and I just wanted to read a little bit from this section because it's extremely important, extremely powerful. This is the part that just leads up to the song of the Avanti Brahmana. Now listen to this. This is sort of the end of the previous chapter to the 23rd chapter, which is obviously the 22nd chapter. It's called The Elements of Material Creation. It's a very Sankhya-based, where in Sankhya philosophy, Sankhya means counting. So all the elements of material existence are broken down, or material existence is broken down into its parts, and the soul and the super soul also are seen to be separate, completely separate from material existence. So Krishna has just explained this philosophy to Uddhava, this Sankhya type of philosophy, also described in the 3rd canto of the Bhagavatam by Kapila Muni. So then, after describing how there's the soul, and then there's the material nature, and they're completely separate, then Krishna says, for one who is meditating on sense gratification, material life, although lacking in factual existence, does not go away. Because he explains, Krishna has just explained, that the soul is forever pure. The soul is forever uncontaminated. The soul is forever spiritual, completely different from the material nature. So what is this connecting point that's so tight and, practically speaking, impossible to unbind, to break? So this gives a real hint about it. At different parts in the 11th canto, this is made quite clear. It has to do with the false ego, it has to do with the mind, it has to do with Maya, it has to do with but it especially has to do with this. For one who is meditating on sense gratification, and this is what the essence of false ego is. It's taking the position of, I am meant to enjoy. In fact, I am the center of existence. And everything that I see, it has its purpose in relationship to my pleasure. And and if it's favorable for my pleasure, I accept it. Come. And if it's unfavorable or neutral, you have no business in my life. Just like, what's the big dog's name again? Bhima. Such a nice dog, but still a dog. Upward bound, but still at this point a dog. Yesterday he greeted me with great love when I first got out of the car, smelling me. And then when he found out that I didn't have any food, he immediately left. No use. For one who is meditating on sense gratification, material life, although lacking in factual existence, does not go away. Now, what did you hear? Raise your hand. Yes.
Even though it's subtle materially, you're still attached to it.
Okay, but what did you hear exactly? Not what you did in your own intelligence and realization with what you heard, but what did you hear? I'll read it again. Now that you know what my question is going to be, everyone will now listen, I presume. For one who is meditating on sense gratification, material life, although lacking factual existence, does not go away. Just as the unpleasant experiences of a dream do not. What did you hear?
Material life is lacking factual existence.
Yes, thank you. But there was more too. Anyone remember another part? That was very good. Yes?
One who's meditating on sense gratification that doesn't go away.
Even though it has no actual existence. And this is Krishna in the 13th chapter of the 11th canto. He gives such an amazing, in the prayers of the Hansa Avatar, he gives such an amazing explanation of how when you're looking at the material world, you actually don't see the material world as it is. You don't see objective reality. You're seeing most of your own mind, or at least a combination of the mind and the objects. So one who is meditating on sense gratification, material life, although lacking factual existence, just doesn't go away, just as the unpleasant experiences of a dream do not. So just by hearing this one verse, we understand, if we accept Krishna's words and if we examine our own experience honestly, we can see that there is actually only one problem in the world, and that is what the conclusion of the Avanti Brahmana is going to be. And there's only one thing that's holding me back from advancing spiritually. It's my rascal mind. Therefore, Uddhava, do not try to enjoy sense gratification with the material senses. See how illusion based on material duality prevents one from realizing the self. Even though, and then he says, and then Krishna, after explaining that that you're not supposed to be thinking about how to enjoy the material world, but what about all the miseries that come to you? So then Krishna says, even though neglected, insulted, ridiculed, or envied by bad men, although repeatedly agitated by being beaten, the worst type of insults and things can happen to you. But One who desires the highest goal in life should, in spite of all these difficulties, use his intelligence to keep himself safe on the spiritual platform. I mean, the descriptions that he has here of what can happen to one is worse than any boss. Having a boss or two bosses. And then okay, did you hear that part? Krishna said, even though you can be insulted in so many terrible things, one should use one's intelligence to keep oneself safe on the spiritual platform. Now remember what that Krishna says here, use your intelligence. And now Uddhava asks, very respectfully, O best of all speakers, please explain to me how I can properly understand this. Now he's going to ask the question that we were all probably asking. O soul of the universe, O Krishna, the conditioning of one's personality in material life is very strong. And therefore, it is very difficult, even for learned men, to tolerate the offenses committed against them by ignorant people. So we have two problems in one sense. One's on the positive, according to our conditioned nature, and one's on the negative, according to our conditioned nature. One is, how do we stop the particular condition? We're all born, Prabhupada explains that there are 8,400,000 species based on 8,400,000 different kinds of desires. So our material body, our material situation, as also Krishna explains in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, our exact situation in the material world is based on our desires. So he says, if I have this particular conditioning, on one hand, how do I stop the particular material desires? Is this even possible? It is very, but even more difficult, even if you can stop your material desires, and there are many sadhus who can do this, but even more difficult than stopping your material desires is the one that Krishna has just pointed out. And this is what Uddhava is just going to ask. The conditioning of one's personality in material life is very strong, and therefore it is very difficult, even for learned men, to tolerate offenses committed against them by ignorant people. When someone insults you, or even if you think you've been insulted, that person will be in your mind for... I've seen it with myself as a previous Gurukula teacher. Like 20 years later, a child would come over to me, ex-child now, like 25 years old, and said, "Do you remember?" And I'd say, "Oops." "Do you remember that when you said that I had taken the honey or something like that, and I admitted it, but I never took it," or something. And I've seen it in that case, or even in my own consciousness. I still hold things that people said to me that really hurt me. 20 years later, 25 years later, 30 years later. I mean, the person doesn't even remember. There's something small and incidental to them. Maybe, it was foolishly said in a moment of passion, or a moment of, or just their own immaturity or something like that. And they've completely forgotten, but it's still lodged deeply in my heart. And this is hard to stop, even for learned men, even for sadhus. And then Uddhava says something very interesting, because Krishna said, what did Krishna say to how to do it. I brought it to your attention. How did Krishna say what to use? Yes, use your intelligence. But what does Uddhava say now? Only your devotees who are fixed in your loving service and who have achieved peace by residing at your lotus feet are able to tolerate such offenses. Actually speaking, the intelligence, although we always should try to use our intelligence, it is necessary but not sufficient. We actually need devotion. If our heart is bathed continuously in the sweetness of the shelter of relationship with Krishna, of Krishna's lotus feet, then easily everything else can be given up. So that's what Uddhava's question is, and and very subtly this distinction is made here. He said, Shantam te charana layan, that if someone has achieved peace at your lotus feet, he can do it. So I find this very relevant, as is relevant as this opening words of Krishna in the 23rd chapter is relevant. Now Krishna begins, and this is just all interesting points prior, before the actual story of the Avanti Brahmana begins. And this, I wanted to include this part because of its importance. Sukadeva Goswami said, because Sukadeva, this is actually quite close to the time of the departure from this world of Maharaj Parikshit. And Sukadeva Goswami is speaking to Maharaj Parikshit, and he said, Lord Mukunda, the chief of the Dasahas, having thus been respectfully requested by the best of his devotees, Sri Uddhava, first acknowledged the fitness of his servant's statement. And what was the statement? That our conditioning is so strong that even if you're able, practically speaking, to tolerate your own desires and your own nature and bring that under control, but to tolerate the insults of life, especially harsh words hurled by ignorant people, even a learned person, even a muni, even a sadhu, very difficult. So Krishna acknowledges the truth, the fitness of his servant's statement. Then the Lord, whose glorious exploits are most worthy of being heard, began to reply to him. And I just wanted to mention that little, because the Bhagavatam is so wonderful. There's this, every time the name of Krishna is uttered, it's uttered in such a way that it has such import and such meaning that we should take note of. So the Lord, whose glorious exploits means his activities, powerful, shravaniya virya, that his activities are so powerful, they are worthy to decorate the ear. And so by saying they are worthy, the Lord whose exploits are most worthy of being heard, what is he saying? That we should hear the Lord's exploits. And practically speaking, this is one of the essential messages of the entire Srimad Bhagavatam and the purpose of the Bhagavatam. We should hear about Krishna. Because if we don't hear about Krishna, then what will happen? everyone's become very humble.
We hear
We'll hear so many other things, yes, but on the positive side, so we'll become distracted, because whatever you hear about, whatever association you have, and you hear about that kind of thing, the desires that are in that person's heart, through hearing from that person, will be transferred to your heart. And the same thing about spiritual Krishna Katha. If we hear about Krishna, the desire, the attraction to Krishna will grow. And not only that, but Srinvatam Svakatha Krishna Ridyantasto Yabhat. Krishna from within the heart, if we develop the eagerness to hear about Krishna. Actually, Srila Jiva Goswami describes in the Sri Bhakti Sindhava that there are three kinds of bhakti. There's Aropa Siddha Bhakti, there is Sarupa Siddha Bhakti, and then there is Sanga Siddha Bhakti. So Aropa Siddha Bhakti is, say if you have something like if you have a job. Now your job doesn't have anything to do with Krishna, but you impose and make your job bhakti by doing something like giving some of the money that you earn to Krishna. So therefore something that doesn't have anything to do with bhakti, bhakti becomes imposed upon it. And a second kind of bhakti is Sanga Siddha Bhakti. So Sanga Siddha Bhakti is you take something that inherently doesn't have anything to do with bhakti. Say someone has an ability to fast, or someone has an ability to manipulate the material energy, or someone has this ability, or someone has that ability, someone has a quality of tapasya, or to be able to not speak, or whatever. And you can take those qualities and use those qualities in the service of bhakti. And by associating with bhakti sangha, they have the qualities of bhakti. So one has a tendency towards karma, the second has a tendency towards jnana, and the third one is Sarupa Siddha Bhakti, which is the items of bhakti that inherently have potency, the potency of bhakti. That is the Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, etc. So unless our life has a lot of Sarupa Siddha Bhakti in it, the other elements of bhakti that we do, because practically speaking no one can just hear and chant all day long unless that person is very, very fortunate. Or very exalted. Unless our life has sufficient amount of hearing and chanting about Krishna, then the other elements of bhakti, the Sarupa Siddha Bhakti and the Aropa Siddha Bhakti, and Sanga Siddha Bhakti will be insufficient to keep us inspired in bhakti itself with a bhakti goal. So anyway, thus the Lord, whose glorious exploits are most worthy of being heard, began to reply to Uddhava's question. So what was Uddhava's question? Okay, we'll start all over again. Uddhava's question was that the conditioning, the conditioned tendencies of men are so strong that even, it's so hard to give up one's material desires, but even if one is able to give up one's material desires, to be able to tolerate insults and the negative things that happen to you is even more difficult. Is it even possible, practically speaking? So Krishna replies, is that clear what the question was? Because that is relevance, so relevant in the song of the Avanti Brahmana. So Krishna begins by saying, O disciple of Brihaspati, there is virtually no saintly man in this world capable of resettling his own mind after it has been disturbed by the insulting words of uncivilized men. Now, these words of Krishna's are very important for us in dealing as devotees, because obviously devotees, at least some of us, we're very uncivilized, and now we're trying to improve ourselves. But we want to be very civilized, civilized or advanced. So we should learn this point in our dealings with each other. We should know it well. Sharp arrows which pierce one's chest. Has anyone ever been shot by a sharp arrow? Yes? Did you raise your hand? No, I was wondering. I was wondering what you did for fun. Sharp arrows which pierce one's chest. We can't even imagine what it would feel like, practically speaking. And reach the heart. So how much pain? Did anyone ever get a bee sting? Get stung by a bee or a wasp? Well, you could multiply that by a few thousand or something, or million. Sharp arrows which pierce one's chest and reach the heart do not cause as much suffering as the arrows of harsh, insulting words that become lodged within the heart when spoken by uncivilized men. So he's equating, Krishna himself is equating harsh words with being uncivilized, because that's one thing you learn when you live in India, at least, is that, people may hate you, people may be your enemy and want to stab you in the back, but they'll speak so sweetly to you. Because that's civilized. Maybe not 100% civilized, but it's civilized. But how easily, and I know that, and I saw this with living in Vrindavan for many years, speaking with some in the Indian workers and the Indian devotees. One of the things they really didn't like about Westerners is that how quickly they raised their voice and started yelling at them. Sharp arrows which pierce one's chest and reach the heart do not cause as much suffering as the arrows of harsh, insulting words that become lodged within the heart when spoken by uncivilized men. Now Krishna's going to say, he's just said that it's almost impossible for even a saintly person to tolerate the insulting words spoken. And it causes more pain, these insulting words cause more pain than an arrow in the heart. Because you can take out an arrow and it will heal after a week or a month or 6 months. But harsh words will continuously give one pain. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Now Krishna's going to say, so on one side, we learn that we should be careful in our speaking. But on the other side, Krishna is going to say that it's actually possible to do it. And he's going to tell a story of someone who did it. And this person was a complete materialist, unbalanced in every way, and that went boom, and became a complete spiritualist who we cannot imitate it. And we don't recommend this. I'll say this 5 times right now, so I don't have to say it 5 times during the presentation. We don't recommend you follow this path. We don't recommend you follow this path. We don't recommend, how many? That's 3, you follow this path. We don't recommend, at least you remember that. One more. We don't recommend that this is the path that you should follow, but there is the essence of this path we do recommend that you follow. So, once a certain sannyasi, Tridandi Bhikshu, it doesn't say Tridandi here, but he's a Vaishnava. A Vaishnava sannyasi comes out later. Once a certain sannyasi was insulted in many ways by impious men. However, with determination, he remembered he was suffering the fruit of his own previous karma. So here is half the philosophy in this first verse. With determination, he remembered that he was suffering the fruit of his previous karma. I will narrate to you his story and that which he spoke. In the country of Avanti, there once lived a certain Brahmana who was very rich, and he was gifted with all opulences, and who was engaged in the occupation of commerce. Now, what word stands out? What English word stands out in that sentence? In what I just read. I'll read it again. Okay.
Engaged.
Anyway, one word stands out in my mind. Wait. Let's see who's a good mind reader at least. In the country of Avanti, there once lived a certain Brahmana who was very rich and gifted with all opulences, and who was engaged in the occupation of commerce.
Gifted.
Yes, who got gifted? Yes. You get an M for mind reading. Gifted, because it's really a fact. Whatever we have is a gift of Krishna. Whatever opulence you have, whatever ability you have, is a gift of Krishna. But if we acknowledge that it's a gift of Krishna, then we have to acknowledge that we maybe have to do something in return to Krishna. Or we lose our pride. So no one wishes to do that. But it's a gift. And what happens? I've told this story so many times. That one time, when I went to I visited Hong Kong, and His Holiness Giridhara Swami picked myself and Mataji up. He invited us to come. And he picked us up somehow or another in a stretch limo. Have you heard this before? It's true. So, he said, and then I said, why did you do this? And he said, it didn't cost very much more than a taxi. So something happens when you get into a stretch limo. What to speak of during the time you're riding in it. Because stretch limos, did you ever see a stretch limo that had glass that was clear on the windows? No, you can't. Why? People will be, who's in there? So it's very mysterious. Oh, the person who's in the stretch limo, I can't see him. He must be so important. So you're riding along, and it was about a 20-minute ride. And I felt my pride, like growing at every minute. And then we stopped in front of the place where I was staying, which was someone's apartment. And here the most important moment occurs. Because people can't see who is in it. But now the driver gets out and he opens the door. And you walk out. And everyone sees it was you in the stretch limo. So Krishna was so funny. So the moment arrived, I walked out. Driver got the bags out of the car. And we had to stay on the 4th floor of the apartment. There was no elevator, and we had to carry our own luggage over Pride gone. But the idea that whatever opulence, even if you, because it's only yours, whatever it is, it's only yours for such a short time. You see this, whatever you have, all the upadis, the identities that you impose upon yourself. This is me, and I'm better than this one at this, and I have more than this one at that, and I have this. One by one, as you get older, you lose each and everything. Everything. They're a gift that time Krishna has given actually for use in his service, and he will take away in time. He will, he must, he will, he must, because they're not yours. So what happens when you don't acknowledge it's a gift? The rest of the verse says, but he was a miserly person, selfish, extremely selfish, lusty, greedy, and very prone to anger. So he was bad. He was a miser. He was selfish. And a selfish is the worst kind of fish. In his home, devoid of religiosity and lawful sense gratification, the family members and guests were never properly respected, even with words. He would not even allow sufficient gratification for his own body at the suitable times. Since he was so hard-hearted and miserly, his sons, his in-laws, his wife, his daughters and servants began to feel inimical towards him. Becoming disgusted, they would never treat him with affection. This is a psychological principle. When we're feeling somewhat empty inside, we feel like we need more, and therefore we want everything for ourselves, and the more we become selfish and take for ourselves, the less affection that anyone gives us, so we feel more and more empty, then we become more self-absorbed, and then the more self-absorbed we become, the less people want to give us affection, the more empty and lonely we feel, so we become more feel that I need so much, and on the other hand, if we give, then we get even what we don't have somehow or another. So in this way, so no one was pleased with him. And this is such the opposite. It's just the opposite. He was completely unbalanced. He was just the opposite of a Vaishnava. Because a Vaishnava is Paradukha Dukhi. In this way, the presiding deities of the 5 family sacrifices became angry at the Brahmana, who being niggardly, means miserly, guarded his wealth like a yaksha, who had no good destination, either in this world or the next, and who was totally deprived of all religiosity and sense gratification, sense enjoyment. He had nothing. He had nothing. No one and nothing, but he had his wealth, but wouldn't use it for anything. O magnanimous Uddhava, by his neglect of these demigods, he depleted his stock of piety, because wealth comes from piety. It doesn't come from one's endeavor. Whatever gifts we have, whatever opulences and abilities we have, whatever happiness we have, it comes from piety. It doesn't come from our hard work alone. It's very difficult for a conditioned soul to actually accept this, because the very nature of false ego makes us think that it is me. I am kartaham. I am the one who is doing this. This success is because of me. I've done it, and I hope everyone will understand that. This is the nature of false ego. By the neglect of these demigods, he depleted his stock of piety, and when his piety was depleted, so was his wealth. The accumulation of his repeated exhaustive endeavors was totally lost. Suddenly, he who thought, look what I have done, had nothing. Some of the wealth of this so-called Brahmana was taken away by his relatives, because relatives know how to extract. My dear Uddhava, some by thieves, because thieves know how to take you up. Some by the whims of providence, you can't control it. Some by the effects of time. Some by ordinary men, and some by government authorities, who seem to be the most expert at taking away one's wealth. So, having lost his wealth, he lost everything. What? If you have if you've never had much, and you lose something, you're used to it. Or if you've had poor health your life, and then you're sick, it's nothing. But if you have great health, and then something takes away all your health, or if you're so wealthy, and you lose everything, and you're poverty-stricken, your whole sense of identity is lost. Your whole understanding, your whole false ego, this is what it is, your whole false ego crumbles. And you have no sense of self. You're lost. You don't have any shelter. You actually don't have any false shelter. But you actually never had that false shelter. But we continuously are taking shelter of a false shelter. And that is what Maya does. So, finally, when his property was completely lost, he who never engaged in religiosity or sense enjoyment became ignored by his family members. Then no one would talk to him anymore. Because when you're wealthy, even if people don't like you, everyone will smile at you and treat you politely. And it's a peculiar quirk of nature that if you have really a lot of money, wherever you go, you never have to pay for anything. Wherever you go, people will buy you this and buy you that, get this for you. This is the people who have lots of money, the most money. So, no one, why? Why is everyone so nice to wealthy people?
Because they want something in return.
Yes, they want more than they're giving, for sure. So what's behind their smiles?
Expectations.
Selfish expectations. So is it a real smile? They're really happy to see you? It's sort of just like the dog who came and sniffed me. I thought first, oh, he remembers me, how nice. What a wonderful dog he is. But then, he's left. So, his whole sense of who he was, which was actually who he wasn't, or rather who he temporarily was in illusion, with the soul mixed with matter, it was lost, crumbled. Thus, he began to feel unbearable anxiety. Having lost all his wealth. Now, this may sound like an exaggeration, but it isn't. He felt great pain and lamentation. I mean, even if you lose your mobile phone, you get in complete anxiety and everything. How can I go on? I lost my contacts. Oh. What to speak of having lost your identity theft or... Having lost his wealth, he felt great pain and lamentation. His throat choked up with tears, and he meditated for a long time on his fortune. How did this happen to me? I'm such a good person, I never do anything wrong. But then, a powerful feeling of renunciation came over him. Some purva sanskar awoke within him. And it wasn't only renunciation, as we'll find out at the end. Some bhakti. And bhakti, jnana vairagya, also comes. And this can only happen, and in the story of Pingala, also in the 11th canto, from disappointment. Renunciation of bhakti can means that at some point she and he have the association of devotees, because bhakti only comes from the bhaktas, the devotees. And the Brahmin spoke. So he went through his time of processing, we would say nowadays, his misery, and due to his bhakti and his renunciation, he actually came through it in a proper way. And this is what he said. He first laments. Lamentation has a value because it helps fix the mistakes we have made in our mind for the purpose of improving. If we just think about our mistakes, then lamentation is just tamagun. But if we use them to improve, which ultimately means to take shelter of Krishna, they are a necessary part of humility, which means taking shelter of Krishna. So this is what he said. Oh, what great misfortune. So what was his misfortune? Is he going to say that I lost all my wealth? No. I have simply tormented myself uselessly. struggling so hard for money that was not even intended for religiosity or material enjoyment. Generally, the wealth of misers never allows them any happiness. One time I was in Hong Kong and Prabhupada was coming, so we went around to some businessmen who were asking for some donations to pay for Prabhupada's visit, and one family we were quite close to gave 200 Hong Kong dollars, which in those days seemed like a lot of money. And then somehow or another we needed a little more money. So since we're something you usually don't do, but since we were very close to him, we taught his children and things. So I asked him if he could give a little bit more. And he said, no, I can't afford it. I said, okay. So Prabhupada came and he left. And then about 1 or 2 or 3 months after Prabhupada left, actually a very unfortunate story, some thief came into it. He was a Javadi or something like that. He was a dual person. Some thief came in through his window, some group of thieves, and they took a knife and put it at his son's throat, little really cute boy, and said, open the safe. And the thief took $26 million. And I didn't go to him and say, remember I told you that if you give another 200 rupees, so it was $200. I didn't do it. I felt terrible, actually. But just see, how much money does it take before you feel like you have enough? Enough to satisfy you, enough. It's just not possible. Because security doesn't exist on that level. And on the other hand, I know one devotee who's, when we first started the VAC, he really wanted to learn. He was from South America. He was brilliant. An incredible memory and a self-disciplined mind. Did you know Yadu? Did you know him from South America? There was another part of his name, I can't remember it. I think you might. For years, from South America. But he only wanted to learn and learn and learn. And he studied perfect Sanskrit, spoke Hindi. He knew the whole Bhagavatam. Then after he learned Sanskrit and Hindi and all the books, he still wanted to learn. He had told me, I wanted to study for 10 years and then I'll go preach. But then 10 years passed, and then 15 years passed, and 20, and he still wanted to learn and learn and learn and learn. And then he learned all the Satdarshans, and he learned complete astrology, he learned everything. And then at some point he reached his conclusion. Part of the first stage of his conclusion, that I just want to depend on Krishna. After all that study. So first he started wandering in Vrindavan with nothing. And he found that he was taken care of completely. And he was completely carefree. He didn't have anything. And he told one of my other friends, and then he started wandering, because Vrindavan in one sense it's easy, because the people are very open-hearted, and the village people especially, very, very generous, sleeping, and eating, they'll feed you. So he would just wander. And then he started wandering all over India like that. And he told one of my other friends, they were very close, he said, if you need one book of matches, those little matchboxes that they have in India, and someone offers you a second one, but you don't need it right now, don't take it. And in this way he would just wander and wander and wander. And then he reached the conclusion that That completely satisfied him. And then after this he was ready to preach. And he just started chanting Krishna's names. Every day he would just chant all day long. And then, after doing that for a while, he decided to go to preach in South America. And then, amazingly enough, after a few months, he died. So it's hard to understand how Krishna and why Krishna acts the way he does. But renunciation, even in this age, it's very, very rare. But to be renounced on this level is possible. But Mahaprabhu recommends what? Nirbandha, Krishna Sambandha, Yukta. Nothing is mine, everything is Krishna's. Everything should be used in Krishna's service, but nothing is mine, nothing is meant for my pleasure. Prabhupada once said, and I even saw this picture, there was one picture of Ramakrishna, and someone was offering him money, and he's going like this. And Prabhupada said, you can take a picture of me, someone offering me money, and I'm going like this, bring more. But nothing for me, complete renunciation, everything for Krishna, everything is Krishna's. So anyway, generally he says, the wealth of misers never allows them any happiness. In this life it causes their self-torment and anxiety. And when they die, it sends them to hell. Whatever pure fame is possessed by the famous, and whatever praiseworthy qualities are found in the virtuous, are destroyed by even a small amount of greed. Just as one's attractive physical beauty is ruined by a trace of white leprosy. In the earning, attainment, increase, protection, expense, loss, and enjoyment of wealth, all men experience great labor, fear, anxiety, and delusion. Theft, violence, speaking lies, duplicity, lust, anger, perplexity, pride, quarreling, enmity, faithlessness, envy, and the dangers caused by women, gambling, and intoxication are the 15 undesirable qualities that contaminate men because of greed for wealth. Although these qualities are undesirable, men falsely ascribe value to them. That which causes pain and trouble, people value. This is due to Maya. One desiring to achieve the real benefit of life should therefore remain aloof from undesirable material wealth. Even now, I just heard a very unfortunate story of that the devotees in the Melbourne community may be aware of, and these things sound like exaggerations, but they're not. Even a man's brothers, wife, parents, and friends united with him in love will immediately break off their affectionate relationships and become enemies, even over a single coin. For even a small amount of money, these relatives and friends become very agitated and their anger is inflamed. Acting as rivals, they quickly give up all sentiments of goodwill and will reject one at a moment's notice, even to the point of committing murder. This is what the Bhagavatam says. And even the wealthiest people, like the Ambani family, Reliance family, the two brothers, how much money they have, we can't even imagine. But they complete enmity with each other. They can't deal with each other. They can't. This is Kali Yuga, especially. See, and the problem is always the other person. But the Avanti Brahmana is going to explain the actual problem again. As he said in the beginning, there's only one problem. It's this mind. And there is only one solution. Those who obtain human life, which is prayed for even by the demigods, and in that human birth becomes situated as a first-class Brahman. In other words, one has an opportunity. Those who have this opportunity are extremely fortunate. If they disregard this important opportunity, they are certainly killing their own self-interest and thus achieve a most unfortunate end. So he's lamenting now. What mortal man, having achieved this human life, which is the very gateway to both heaven and liberation, would willingly become attached to that abode of worthlessness, material property? One who fails to distribute his wealth to the proper shareholders, the demigod sages, forefathers, and ordinary living entities, as well as his immediate relatives, in-laws, and his own self, is maintaining his wealth simply like a yaksha, and he will fall down. So almost finished here. Discriminating persons are able to utilize their money, this is a very nice verse, all their gifts, their money, their youth, and strength to achieve perfection. To be able to use whatever gifts you have so that they don't push you to hell, but rather carry you upward to the spiritual world, to Krishna's lotus feet. That is good intelligence. Actually, these are going to be the final words, one of the final words, instructions that Krishna gives Uddhava in the 29th chapter of something very similar to this, in the 29th chapter of the 11th canto. But then he says, but I had wealth, I had fortune, but I feverishly squandered these in the useless endeavor for further wealth. Now that I am an old man, what can I achieve? I've lost everything, because without youth, you have no strength. Without strength, how could you accomplish anything? So now what can I do? I'm completely lost. I cannot go this way, I cannot go this way. Why must an intelligent man suffer by his constant vain efforts to get wealth? Indeed, this whole world is most bewildered by someone's illusory potency. So he's brought it to the point that the whole world is thinking like this. The whole society, the whole world is one world, united in the concept of economic development will satisfy everyone. This is the propaganda, and everyone believes this. And actually, it satisfies no one, because you'll always find that someone has more than you. And as soon as you see that someone has more than you can enjoy more than you think that you can enjoy. You think he's enjoying more than you can enjoy. And therefore dissatisfied. So if everyone is thinking like this, he concludes, there must be someone whose illusory energy is so strong, that it's so powerful, because it's not true, that is able to keep everyone in illusion. This person must be so powerful. So I want to find that person who is putting everyone in illusion. For one who is in the grips of death, and this is obvious, becomes really obvious when you're about to die. What is the use of wealth? Or those who offer it? What is the use of sense gratification? Or those who offer it? Or for that matter, what is the use of any type of fruit of activity which simply causes one to again take birth in the material world? Because At the time of death, the illusion is stripped away and one is faced with the reality or material reality. One is face to face with Krishna in the form of death. What's the verse? Mrityu? And one cannot hide in illusion anymore. Because if there is a fight between illusion and reality, which one must win? What do you think? Yeah. I always hope someone will say illusion, because I have a great test for them. That they should think that the wall doesn't exist and then run as fast as they can into the wall. In the 60s, people used to do things like that. And then he said, this was it. Nuna me Bhagavan tushta. Sarva Deva Mayo Hari. That somehow or another, certainly, that the Supreme Lord Bhagavan must be satisfied with me. And he is Hari. Hari means he who takes away. But he is Sarva Deva Mayo Hari. That he is the Lord of all the Devatas. He took away everything. And before he was thinking it was the worst thing that could possibly happen, but now he's thinking that he must be satisfied with me. It's not the Devatas who've done it, it's the Lord of the Devatas who's done it. He's seen Krishna in it. He's seen Krishna's mercy in it. And he's seen the kind touch of Krishna's hand, even in this most difficult circumstance. Now, one has to be very deep to be able to do this. And this is one reason, but not the only reason that we don't recommend the path that he takes, is that because it's very easy, based on a sentiment, you're very attached on this side, and then something terrible happens on this side, and then boom, now I'm completely detached. But if it's not based on sufficient depth in bhakti, if it's only a sentiment, then very easily one goes again. But his realization is total. As total as his Maya was on that side, the depth of his realization is on this side. But that's only one reason we don't recommend this path. Yeah, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Hari, who contains within himself all the demigods, must be satisfied with me. Okay. So he's seeing, just see how deep. First of all, how deep one has to become ultimately to feel in the most difficult circumstances that you're in the kind and soft and loving hands of Krishna. And life is a practice for that. Because every day, practically speaking, so many things don't happen the way we want them to happen. And watch how your mind reacts to it. Do you see Krishna in that? Do I see Krishna in that? Or do I start blaming everyone else? Indeed, he has brought me to the suffering condition and forced me to experience detachment, which is the boat Prabhu to carry me over this ocean of material life. It is part of the boat, actually. The metaphor of the boat is used several times in the Bhagavatam. The other part of the boat, you have to be detached to get into the boat. Otherwise you stand on the shore thinking about the boat. But once you're in, you have to take shelter of the boat, and you have to hear and chant about Krishna. Then you are in the boat. Both parts. So the boat to carry me over this ocean of material life. If there is any time remaining in my life, I will perform austerities and force my body to subsist on the bare necessities. Without further confusion, I shall pursue that which constitutes my entire self-interest in life, and I shall remain satisfied within the self unless we learn the art of finding the satisfaction in our relationship with Krishna. Nothing else will work, actually. Then it will be on the intellectual platform only. And that's what Uddhava said. Krishna had said the intellectual platform, and Uddhava said, you're a devotee. He is the one who can easily do this. Because the soul of a devotee, the person, is being bathed in the sweetness of Braja, of his relationship with Krishna. And there's so much sweetness in that, nothing else has meaning. Nothing else matters in that sense. But unless one's tasting that sweetness, or some sweetness in that regard, then just the intellectual part of knowing this is philosophically true will be very, very difficult to maintain. Thus may the presiding demigods of the three worlds kindly show their mercy upon me. Indeed, Maharaj Khatvanga was able to achieve the spiritual world in a single moment. Lord Sri Krishna continued, his mind thus determined, that most excellent Avanti Brahmana was able to untie the knots of desire within his heart. He then assumed the role of a peaceful and silent sannyasi mendicant. Okay. Now you are extremely patient. Thank you. Okay, I'm afraid to look and see what time it is. Okay, 11:20. Okay, well, we'll have time to speak, but right now it's 20 after, so why don't we take a break now till 1:15, so you'll have some time to recuperate. If you feel you need to take a little bit of rest, take a little bit of rest, because we still have almost 2 hours after that. I'll adjust the program so we'll end on time. Still, we should be able to do that. But thank you very much, because you're quite attentive, considering that there was a lot of speaking, a lot of reading. But I think it's important, and I think it's extremely relevant too, and for everyone.